Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. Working the night shift as a nurse can get incredibly lonely. The halls of the hospital are nearly empty except for a skeleton crew of staff members and the occasional emergency patient coming through the doors. Most nights it's just me wandering the long, dim corridors, peeking into rooms to check vitals on the handful of sleeping patients. My soft rubber-soled shoes echo off the linoleum tiles, blending in with the endless beeps and hums of machines. The eerie quiet feels isolating, like I'm the only person left awake in the whole sleeping city. A few months ago, in an effort to curb the boredom and silence of the night shift, I decided to download Tinder. I wasn't necessarily looking for love or even a hookup. I just wanted someone to chat with to help pass the time between taking patients' temperatures and distributing medications. That's when I first met Adam. His profile said he also worked irregular hours, which explained why he was often messaging me around 3 or 4 a.m. We hit it off right away. The conversation just seemed to flow effortlessly. He had an offbeat sense of humor that resonated with me. Even over text, he made me genuinely laugh out loud into the empty nurse's station, a cute EMT with a wry personality. He seemed almost too good to be true. After about a week of constant late-night messaging, Adam finally asked me out on an actual date. I hesitantly agreed. Meeting an online stranger alone in the middle of the night didn't seem like the smartest idea. But Adam assured me we would go to a nearby 24-hour diner so there would be other people around. Something about his warm, funny messages made me feel like I could trust him despite my reservations. We had planned to meet there at 2 a.m. when I got off work. The night of the date, I changed out of my blue scrubs after clocking out and freshened up in the locker room bathroom. I spritzed on some perfume from a rollerball I kept in my tote bag and swiped on a layer of rose-scented lip balm. I ran a brush through my hair, my heart fluttering with excitement. What if this turned into something real? It had been so long since I'd connected with someone. At 1:55 a.m., I pulled up to the diner and parked under a flickering streetlight near the front door. But as I climbed out of the car, I was surprised to see the open 24 hours sign unlit. A weathered clothes sign hung crookedly in the window instead. That's strange, I thought. This place was always open when I drove past it on my way to work. A cold late-night breeze whipped around me as I stood staring in confusion at the unexpectedly shuttered diner. Then my phone dinged with a new message. Adam, I'm here waiting for you. Come around back. A nervous pit formed in my stomach, but I told myself not to freak out just yet. Maybe Adam had picked a different spot for our date after finding the diner unexpectedly closed. I cautiously made my way around the side of the building, the click of my low heels echoing off the alley walls. As I turned the corner into the back of the diner, I stopped short. The entire alley was empty, nothing but a couple of dumpsters and piles of soggy cardboard boxes. Far in the back, I could see the looming silhouette of an old abandoned hospital surrounded by a high chain-link fence with cudzle growing through it. The hospital had been shut down for years. Adam was nowhere in sight. My phone buzzed again. Keep going towards the hospital. I'll meet you at the entrance. Panic started rising in my chest. What kind of date was this? Going to an abandoned building in the middle of the night with a complete stranger no longer seemed fun or safe. I stood frozen between the dumpsters, unsure whether to keep walking towards the creepy hospital or turn back. I called out, Adam. Into the darkness, my voice small and wavering, only silence in response. As I power walked back towards the street, my phone kept buzzing with more messages from Adam. Where are you going? Don't you want to see me? Each one more demanding than the last. By the time I made it back to my car, tears of frustration and fear were stinging my eyes. I fumbled to unlock the door with shaking hands. Just as I grabbed the handle, my phone lit up with one final text. You didn't think I wouldn't recognize you, did you? I'd know that smile anywhere. See you back at the hospital tomorrow night. I gasped aloud and whirled around, peering into the dark, empty street behind me. How did he know where I worked? I hadn't told him any specifics about my job as a nurse. A million terrifying thoughts raced through my mind all at once. Had Adam been stalking me at the hospital this whole time? Is that how he chose me? His unsuspecting victim. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped off into the night. As I drove home in a panicked blur, my phone kept buzzing endlessly with call after call from Adam. But I was too afraid to even listen to the voicemails he was leaving. Who was this man who claimed he had been watching me for months? And why had I so foolishly agreed to meet him alone in the pitch dark? I didn't sleep at all that night, obsessively checking that my doors were locked. The next evening, I reluctantly forced myself to go to my shift, not wanting Adam to know how shaken I was. I kept peering over my shoulder as I made rounds, paranoid I was being followed even in the bright fluorescent hallways. When I passed by the abandoned wing, I imagined hearing footsteps echoing behind me and quickened my pace. But each time I whipped around, no one was ever there. My phone stayed silent and still through the entire night. As the hours passed uneventfully, I gradually convinced myself that Adam had given up once I fled from our disastrous date. When I walked out to my car at sunrise, the rising light washing away the night's shadows, I finally felt a sense of relief. I was looking forward to getting home and resting up after an emotionally exhausting shift. I slid into the driver's seat, tossed my tote bag on the passenger side, and went to start the car. But I froze. Sitting right there on the passenger seat was a single red rose, and tied around it, a note that read, "See you soon." My blood turned to ice in my veins. This nightmare wasn't over yet. Adam was still out there, and he knew exactly where to find me. I still vividly remember the wave of excitement I felt when I first matched with Jack on Tinder. His profile showed a rugged yet refined man with kind, trusting eyes and a warm, genuine smile. For a week, we exchanged flirtatious messages, gradually opening up and learning little details about each other's lives. When he finally asked me up on a proper date, I enthusiastically agreed, thrilled at the prospect of meeting this charming stranger in person. We decided to meet at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown that came highly recommended. I arrived early, nervously checking my reflection in the window as I waited for Jack to show up. Right on time, he strolled in, and he looked even better than his pictures. Dapper in a tailored suit jacket, yet approachable in his casual button-down and jeans. He gave me a heart-fluttering grin as he walked over. We embraced in an awkward half-hug, half-handshake before sitting down. What followed was the best first date I could ever imagine. We talked for hours, conversation flowing easily from our jobs to family to favorite travel destinations. Jack was attentive, thoughtful, and so incredibly witty, often leaving me laughing until my cheeks hurt. I found myself enthralled not just by his handsome looks, but his gentle spirit and bright mind. As we finally left the restaurant hand in hand, I felt certain I had met someone extraordinary. Jack and I began seeing each other frequently after that night. We went on romantic walks through the park, saw movies at the indie theater downtown, cooked elaborate meals together in his apartment. I felt myself falling quickly, his compassion and confidence both alluring. On weekends, he would surprise me with thoughtful gifts, a book by my favorite author, a bottle of the obscure French wine I had mentioned loving. Each new experience together was better than the last. For the first time in years, I genuinely believed I had found a real chance at lasting love. Then one otherwise normal Saturday morning, my blissfully blossoming romance took an unsettling turn. As I was grabbing coffee, I noticed a familiar figure reading a newspaper, Jack, or at least a man identical to him. Unsure, I crept closer, only to have the doppelganger look up and reveal himself to be a total stranger. Shaken, I hurried out of the cafe and tried to convince myself it was just an odd coincidence. But from that morning on, Jack's double seemed to pop up everywhere I went. Walking to work, I would pass him on a crowded sidewalk, though he would disappear into the sea of people whenever I whipped around for a second glimpse. At the gym, I spotted him across the weight room watching me, only to have him vanish when I strode aggressively toward him. Once, while shopping with my sister, I even saw him peering around a mannequin at me. But just like all the other times, he would rapidly change his appearance or duck out of view whenever I tried to confront him. Deeply unsettled, I decided to set up a test. I picked a restaurant clear across town from my usual haunts and invited Jack on an impromptu date night. Just an hour in, while we laughed over dessert, my blood ran cold. There he was at a table near the back, blatantly staring at us with Jack's face. I sat paralyzed, heart pounding wildly as he held my gaze with a sinister half-smile. When I could finally tear my eyes away, I turned to Jack, ashen-faced. Oblivious, he squeezed my hand reassuringly and suggested we head home early. The walk to my apartment was a tense blur. The next day, I hesitantly brought up what I had seen to Jack. He seemed completely confused, even chuckling lightly at my claims of a doppelganger stalker. Of course, it was just a stranger that happened to resemble him. After all, how could he possibly be in two places at once? Though he appeared genuine, alarm bells continued ringing in my mind. From then on, the paranoia grew worse. The stalker with Jack's face popped up at the bookstore, the takeout place, even outside my bedroom window late at night peering in. Each time I tried to approach, he would change his features and disappear or simply vanish by the time I drew near. My desperate pleas to friends, family, and police were dismissed as an overactive imagination. But I knew this was no delusion. Someone had found a way to impersonate others and was using Jack's image to torment me. At my breaking point, I came face to face with the imposter during a walk through the park. Before my eyes, his visage transformed from Jack into a blue-eyed blonde, then a freckled redhead, morphing identities fluidly like some nightmarish movie special effect. All my worst fears were confirmed. This was no ordinary stalker situation. When Jack called that night, I ended our relationship on the spot, ignoring his confused protests. Though it devastated me, I knew it was too dangerous to stay involved with him when someone clearly had access to disturbing technology they were willing to use to upend my life. In the aftermath, I deleted all my dating profiles, too rattled to trust meeting anyone online again. I could never know if a charming profile pic was an earnest suitor's real face or just a high-tech mask shielding a stranger with sinister intentions. The anonymity and access of apps like Tinder, once exciting, now felt like liabilities primed for exploitation. So I withdrew from the dating scene entirely, hoping that out of sight and off the grid means out of mind for my tormentor. But I still constantly check over my shoulder in public, wary that every passerby who glances my way could be hiding their true nature behind an illusion only they can control. The confidence I once had in trusting others has been shattered, perhaps forever. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship and was feeling ready to dip my toes back into the dating pool. My best friend Jess was the one who convinced me to download Tinder, since that's how she met her new boyfriend. At first, I was very hesitant about online dating. It all seemed so impersonal and potentially risky, but Jess insisted it was a great way to meet people, so I decided to give it a shot. After creating my profile, I started swiping. There were definitely some weirdos and creeps on there, but occasionally I'd come across someone who seemed sweet and normal. One guy named Henry stood out. He was cute in a bookish way, and his bio made him seem down to earth and funny. We matched and started chatting. Henry came across as very charming over text. He would ask thoughtful questions and make silly jokes that actually made me laugh out loud. I felt comfortable with him, so when he asked me to meet up for dinner, I said yes. I was pretty nervous as I got ready for the date. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd been on a first date. I decided to wear a little black dress that was classy but flattering. I styled my hair in loose curls and did my makeup with some red lipstick. I grabbed my favorite heels to complete the outfit, feeling confident as I looked in the mirror. When I arrived at the restaurant, a trendy Italian place downtown, Henry was already seated at our table. He smiled and stood up to give me a slightly awkward hug. So far, so good. We had some small talk about work and life in the city as we looked over the menu. I suggested we get a bottle of wine to share. The waiter came to take our order, then bustled off. That's when an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. I tried to keep the conversation flowing by asking Henry about his hobbies and friends, but his answers were clipped. Work, gym, books, he would say in response to my questions, or he'd give a simple yes or no. I started to feel self-conscious, like it was my fault we weren't connecting. Henry just sat there fidgeting with his utensils, not making much eye contact. Trying to break the tension, I told a funny story about my coworker's disastrous attempts at using a curing machine. Henry blinked and said, before taking a too big gulp of wine. I could tell he was super nervous and awkward, but I didn't know how to get him to open up more. The stilted small talk continued as we waited for our meals. My hopes for a romantic first date were quickly fading. About halfway through dinner, I noticed that Henry was starting to look sweaty and pale. His eyes were glassy and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked with concern. "You don't look so good." He assured me he was fine, just had some indigestion, but he was clearly unwell. Within a few minutes, Henry shot up from his seat and bolted towards the bathroom, hand over mouth. I was completely shocked when he started projectile vomiting all over the floor and directly onto my new stiletto heels. The whole restaurant gasped as the dramatic scene unfolded. I felt awful for Henry, who was violently ill, but I was also mortified. People turned to stare and whisper as he continued to get sick. The manager rushed over looking angry yet worried. I avoided eye contact with the other patrons, cringing at the attention. When he finally stopped vomiting, Henry emerged from the bathroom looking dazed and pale. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, barely meeting my sympathetic gaze. I helped clean him up and grab his things while the manager called a cab. Henry sat shakily at the table, apologizing over and over again in sheer humiliation. I quickly paid the bill, leaving a very generous tip, and waited with Henry until his ride arrived. He could barely string a sentence together between dry heaves. I told him not to worry, that I just hoped he would be okay. I was embarrassed about the shoes, but mostly felt terrible that he was so sick. We parted ways outside the restaurant, both mortified about what transpired. Henry continued texting apologies, but I told him not to stress. There would certainly be no second date, but it wasn't his fault. He clearly had food poisoning or the stomach flu or something. The whole debacle made me want to delete my Tinder account and remain single forever. But my friends convinced me to give dating another try. Not every guy is going to vomit on your first date. Jess insisted. So eventually I did start swiping again, although I was hyper-vigilant about any pre-date red flags. And I always carried extra shoes in my car, just in case lightning somehow struck twice. Looking back now, the vomit date has become legendary amongst my friend group. Jess still tears up from laughing so hard when I retell the traumatic tale. It was mortifying at the time, but has turned into one of my most hilarious dating horror stories. Here's hoping my upcoming dates involve less vomit and more romance. Third time's the charm, right? I still cringe when I think about that fateful Tinder date with Serena a few weeks ago. When we first matched on the app, everything seemed promising. Her profile caught my eye right away. She was an attractive brunette with a bright, beaming smile. In her photos, she was doing fun, active things like kayaking, hiking, and yoga. Her bio said she was an enthusiastic world traveler who also enjoyed staying in and binge watching Netflix. We liked a lot of the same TV shows and indie bands. Serena seemed outgoing, adventurous, and laid back, just my type. Our initial messages back and forth were flirty and energetic. She would send me silly selfies making faces or posing with her adorable terrier. I reciprocated with some of my own dumb Snapchat photos. Her banter was quick-witted and made me literally laugh out loud at times. Meeting up in person was the obvious next step. When I suggested a workout day at the gym, Serena loved the idea. She said she was excited to have a partner to try out new equipment and fitness classes with. I thought it would be a great low-pressure way to get to know each other while doing something active we both enjoyed. The morning of the date, I took extra care getting ready, making sure to spritz on my best cologne. I wanted to make a good first impression on Serena. I arrived at the gym a few minutes early and did some dynamic stretches to loosen up. Right on time, I saw Serena walk in. She spotted me instantly and came over flashing a bright, enthusiastic smile. Up close, she was just as cute as in her photos, with a girl next door vibe. I was struck by her clear, smooth olive skin and lively hazel eyes. She went in for a slightly awkward hug. I caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and floral. We started with some cardio to warm up, cleaning side-by-side treadmills. The conversation flowed easily as we worked up a light sweat. Serena bubbled over with lively energy as she told me about her job as a photographer for a nonprofit. Her passion for traveling and experiencing new cultures was obvious. She gestured animatedly with her hands as she described some of her favorite trips abroad. I found myself feeling drawn in by her outgoing, bubbly personality. About 10 minutes into our run, I noticed the back of Serena's shirt was damp between her shoulder blades. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon large wet patches began blooming under her arms, down her back, and along her hairline. Wrigglets of sweat dripped from her temples, matting down her ponytail. Her face took on a slick sheen, droplets gathering on her chin before splattering onto her chest. The sweat was far more copious than one would expect from our moderate jog. My own shirt was barely damp at this point, but Serena was drenched, her thin tank top clinging obscenely to every contour of her fit frame. As we moved on to the weight machines, Serena's sweating only grew more extreme. Within minutes, her exposed skin was slick and glossy. Perspiration ran in streams down her neck, gathering the hollow of her throat. Her hair was plastered in wet clumps to her forehead and cheeks. She continuously swiped at her face only for more moisture to instantly bead up and trickle down. The sweat seemed to emanate from every pore, her knees, elbows, and lower back all dripping. I couldn't help but lean away to avoid the constant spray as she lifted and lowered the weights. Up close, Serena had a potent, earthy odor that intensified as her workout went on. The pleasant floral perfume I had noticed earlier was drowned out by the raw, primal smell of her sweat. It was a thick, musky scent, not exactly unpleasant, but powerful. I found myself taking shallow breaths through my mouth to avoid gagging on the damp funk surrounding her. As we moved between machines, I subtly tried to steer us toward ones that allowed more distance between us. By the time we finished our final reps, Serena was utterly drenched. Her sweat had soaked through the fabric of her leggings and sports bra, leaving them clinging obscenely to every inch of her. Rivulets ran down her legs to puddle on the floor. Her ponytail was a sodden rope clinging to the back of her neck. She seemed completely oblivious, chatting and laughing as though she wasn't moments away from coming out of her waterlogged clothes. The sweat accentuated her natural scent until she smelled more animal than human. As we said our goodbyes, I hesitated, unsure whether to go for a hug. Her damp, clammy skin glistened under the gym lights. Wisps of her matted hair stuck to her cheeks and forehead. The air around her shimmered with moisture and musk. I ultimately opted for an awkward handshake, not wanting to press my body against her sopping one. Over the next few days, I agonized over how to proceed. Part of me wanted to look past the excessive sweating and give Serena another chance. After all, we had really hit it off conversationally. She was passionate, outgoing, and adventurous, all qualities I look for in a partner. But the memory of her athletic date scent, the sour, suffocating musk, made my stomach turn. Imagining getting physically intimate, running my hands over her perpetually slick skin, made me recoil instinctively. Ultimately, I made the cowardly choice to simply ghost Serena. She texted me a few times, asking if I wanted to get dinner or see a movie. I dodged the invitations, claiming work was busy until she eventually stopped reaching out. I felt guilty disappearing on her without explanation. But forcing myself through another sweat-soaked date would just lead to hurting her more down the line when her odor finally drove me away for good. In retrospect, I still feel bad about how I handled things. Serena didn't deserve to be ditched like that due to something outside her control. But at the time, I was too shaken and repulsed to communicate my feelings honestly. I suppose it's a reminder that internet dating is a roll of the dice. Your match can seem ideal online, but end up being your own personal nightmare when you finally meet face to face. I cringe remembering how excited I was for that gym date with Serena. If only her photos came with a sweat warning. I had been single for a few years after my divorce, focused on raising my daughter as a single mom. She was now a teenager, and I felt ready to start dating again. I decided to give Tinder a try, since all of my friends were using it with success. After spending a couple weeks swiping through profiles and chatting with different men, I matched with Tom, an attractive man who appeared to be around my age of 45. We exchanged messages over the app and really hit it off. Tom came across as kind and outgoing in our conversations. After a week of messaging back and forth, we decided to exchange numbers and meet up for dinner at a local restaurant. I felt excited for the date as I got ready that evening. It had been so long since I had gotten dressed up and gone out with a romantic prospect. Tom seemed warm and fun in our messages, and it would be nice to have an adult conversation that didn't revolve around parenting or work. I arrived at the restaurant and immediately spotted Tom waiting at a table. He looked just as handsome and put together as his photos. We greeted each other with a hug and settled in at the table, diving into conversation about our days. Tom was very easy to talk to, and the discussion flowed smoothly as we got to know each other. We covered all the usual first date topics, our jobs, hobbies, favorite books, and movies. I shared about life as a single mom to a teenage daughter, while Tom talked about his career in sales and his large extended family. Everything was going wonderfully until our conversation shifted to past relationships. I talked about my marriage to my daughter's father and our eventual amicable divorce. When it was Tom's turn to share, he explained he usually only dated much younger women in their 20s and early 30s. In his words, women at that age are more beautiful and fertile. He wanted to start a family so he could carry on his legacy by having children. I sat in stunned silence as Tom continued speaking casually about his dating preferences. He said he had recently decided to start branching out and date women closer to his own age of 45, just to see how the other side lives. I could not believe what I was hearing from this seemingly normal man. Did he really just reduce women to their looks and baby-making abilities? I may be in my 40s, but I'm still vibrant with a lot to offer as a romantic partner. I felt anger bubbling up inside me as Tom prattled on about why he found younger women more desirable. How could he not realize how offensive and demeaning his perspective was? I am a human being, not an incubator. I worked hard as a single mom to raise a child and build a career for myself. Women over 40 are beautiful, sexy, and full of life experiences. We deserve to be seen as whole people, not just objectified for appearance and fertility. Tom continued his disturbing monologue, apparently oblivious to the outrage and hurt on my face. I sat stewing in my anger, waiting for him to take a breath so I could respond. When he finally paused, I told him flatly that his views were completely inappropriate and insulting to women. He looked at me blankly, seeming confused by my reaction. At that point, I had heard more than enough. I stood up abruptly, gathered my things, and walked out of the restaurant without another word. I was shaking with anger and shock that a seemingly decent man in this day and age could harbor such backwards attitudes about women. I rushed to my car, holding back tears. The entire drive home was a blur as I replayed the offensive comments in my mind. How had I not seen any red flags before meeting Tom in person? His Tinder profile seemed normal. Our conversations gave no indication of his misogynistic views on women and dating, but clearly those twisted attitudes had been lurking underneath his charming, outgoing exterior. I felt disgusted and betrayed. When I arrived home, I immediately deleted and unmatched Tom on Tinder. I did not want any further contact or reminder of him. I felt rattled to my core that such a seemingly nice guy could turn out to be so calloused and small-minded. The experience made me worry about jumping back into dating. I worried what other men might believe or say in private about women. Despite the awful first date, I tried not to let Tom's toxic mindset discourage me from finding love. The next morning, I deleted the Tinder app from my phone. I needed a break from swiping through strangers online. When I was ready to date again, I would try meeting men through trusted friends or activities I enjoyed. There had to be men out there who saw women as whole, equal partners and not just pretty objects. I held out hope I could find someone who appreciated everything I brought to the table at this stage of my life. I deserved that. For the time being, I planned to focus on myself, my daughter, friends, career, and hobbies. I didn't need a man in my life to feel happy and fulfilled. Having been through a divorce, I had learned to embrace the joys of being single. Certainly, I didn't need someone like Tom, who clearly saw me as inferior and only useful for my appearance and fertility. I knew my worth, and I would never again accept such demeaning attitudes in a potential partner. Although the date was an utter disaster, it reminded me that emotional wounds from my divorce had fully healed. I was ready to welcome a healthy, nourishing romance without neglecting my own needs. When Mr. Right came along, we would build a relationship of mutual understanding, care, and respect. Until then, I would enjoy wingwomaning my single friends and exploring life on my own terms. At 45, I was only growing more confident, interesting, and comfortable in my own skin. Any man would be lucky to join me on these adventures of self-discovery rather than stifle my journey. With wisdom and patience, I trusted the right relationship could blossom down the road. But forcing something with the wrong partner like Tom would sabotage the journey. I focused on being open to possibilities while protecting my peace. With faith in myself to choose partners wisely, I embraced whatever the future held. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship a few months ago and was finally starting to feel ready to put myself back out there. My friend convinced me to download Tinder, saying it would be a confidence boost after my breakup. I hesitated at first, worrying I'd just find more heartbreak, but eventually gave in and created a profile. After a few days of swiping, I matched with Alex. His pictures showed a handsome, clean-cut guy with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. He looked like someone I could really click with. We started chatting right away, and conversation came so naturally it was a little uncanny. Within an hour, it felt like we'd known each other for years. Alex told me all about his job as a photographer, his close-knit family, his love of hiking and camping. He asked thoughtful questions and remembered little details about my life in a way no one had before. Each day, we messaged constantly from morning to night. Soon, he asked if I felt ready for a video call date. I was a bit hesitant since we hadn't met in person, but he seemed totally genuine. I figured one quick call couldn't hurt. During that first video chat, the image kept glitching and freezing every few minutes. Alex apologized for the bad connection on his end. He cracked jokes about upgrading his Wi-Fi just for me. His humor and sincerity put me at ease, so we kept talking. A few times the screen went black mid-sentence, but eventually his face would reappear with an awkward laugh. Despite the technical issues, we really seemed to click. I found myself opening up about past heartbreaks, my family, my dreams for the future. It felt nice to find someone I could be vulnerable with. Over the next few weeks, we video chatted almost every night. The glitches and freezes continued frequently, which Alex blamed on using an old laptop. He even sent me a photo of the aging device, joking he'd have to sell his car to afford something nicer. His thoughtfulness won me over. As we spent more virtual time together, I realized I was falling for Alex. Hard. We seemed to have so much in common, from favorite foods to secret quirks. He felt like someone I was meant to meet. One night during our video chat, the screen distorted in a very unsettling way. Alex's face looked gaunt, his eyes sunken back. I asked if he could adjust the camera or lighting, but he insisted nothing was wrong on his end. My stomach nodded anxiously, but I brushed it off. Just another tech issue, I told myself. Over the following week, more odd things happened during our calls. Alex's face would shift between looking normal and oddly artificial. His voice sounded canned and pre-recorded at times. He seemed to space out and ignore my questions completely. I even thought I saw the flash of someone else's face before Alex reappeared on the screen. My internal alarm bells went off, but when I asked about the bizarre glitches, he acted confused. He promised he wasn't playing any tricks on me. Again, I chalked it up to his faulty technology and tried to ignore the weirdness. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right, but I had invested so much hope and emotion into our connection. I couldn't stand the thought that Alex might not be exactly who he portrayed himself to be online. I was terrified to lose what we shared, imaginary or not. So I consciously overlooked all the red flags popping up. One evening, about 2 months after our first message, Alex said his camera wasn't working at all for some reason. He asked if we could just voice chat instead of video. Reluctantly, I agreed. 20 minutes into the call, mid-conversation, his voice cut out completely for a few eerie seconds. Static hissed from the speakers. Then the audio returned, but the voice was much higher pitched, stiff and unfamiliar. Blood drained from my face as I realized I wasn't speaking to the Alex I knew at all. I ended the call instantly, blocking his number and all social media. My mind raced, heart pounding with adrenaline. Alex must have been a complete fake persona, an elaborate catfishing scheme by some stranger. I felt sick thinking about all our intimate conversations, the pieces of myself I'd revealed. It had all been a manipulation, carefully crafted to lure me in. In the following days, paranoia consumed me. I was sure I was being tracked or hacked. I ran antivirus scans, changed passwords, combed through social media privacy settings. Every notification made my pulse spike. Weeks later, the betrayal still stung bitterly. I regretted not trusting my instincts the second things felt off. After this experience, I took a long dating detox to heal and regain perspective. When I finally tried online dating again, I was much more cautious. I only did quick video chats after meeting someone in person first. I learned to watch for any weird technical glitches and avoid sharing too much emotional vulnerability until trust was truly earned. The encounter with fake Alex left me with deep wounds, but it also gave me wisdom. From then on, I approached all virtual connections with open eyes, aware there were predators lurking behind screens. Staying alert became the only way forward. Eventually, I did find real romance again, but only once I protected my heart first. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't see the red flags with Peter right from the start. But in the moment, I was intrigued by the uncanny resemblance and didn't sense the danger ahead. It began innocently enough on Tinder. We matched, exchanged photos, and chatted a bit. Peter seemed pleasant and normal, if not very talkative. Average height, medium build, brown hair, and brown eyes. Nothing stood out except that he looked vaguely like me, though I figured it was just coincidence. After a few days of benign messaging back and forth, we decided to meet up for drinks at a bar downtown. I spent longer than usual getting ready, trying on multiple outfits before settling on a floral dress and tan wedges. I did my makeup and styled my hair, spritzing in a touch of perfume. I wanted to make a good first impression. I was cautiously optimistic as I ordered an Uber to the bar where we planned to meet. When the driver dropped me off, I did a quick scan of the patio. Peter was already seated at a small high-top table near the back, slowly sipping what appeared to be a gin and tonic. I weaved my way through the scattered tables and sat down across from him after ordering a glass of rosé. The conversation began typically jobs, hobbies, hometowns, etc. Peter said he was a software engineer who enjoyed gaming and reading science fiction in his spare time. I talked about my graphic design career and love of fantasy novels. So far, so good. He seemed pleasant and our interests appeared aligned. About 30 minutes in, Peter made an offhand comment about my favorite Thai restaurant, located just down the street from my apartment across town. I was immediately taken aback and caught off guard. I definitely hadn't mentioned this hole in the wall spot to him before, but I brushed it off, assuming I must have forgotten bringing it up. He quickly changed the subject. Over the next hour, the date took an increasingly disturbing turn as Peter casually dropped random personal details about my private life. The name of my childhood dog, Samson, the city, Philadelphia, where I lived during college, my best friend Michelle from high school. With each intimate revelation, my level of discomfort rose. I found myself fidgeting with my napkin under the table, a nervous habit I've had since I was a child. When he mentioned the small, hidden tattoo of a dove on my ribcage, an identical match to one my late mother had, I felt chilled to the bone. There's no way he could possibly know about that concealed ink. I suddenly had the urge to get up and leave immediately, but fear paralyzed me. My heart began pounding rapidly in my chest. Sensing my unease, Peter tried to reassure me in an attempt to get me to stay, but his words were beyond unsettling. He said he felt we had a deeper connection, and he had been watching me for a while. He was here to take over my life, though I had no idea what he meant by that disturbing statement. My breath caught in my throat, and I had to resist screaming or causing a scene. How long had this predator been stalking me, gathering such invasive details about my carefully guarded private world? Mumbling some excuse about needing the restroom, I quickly grabbed my purse, threw some cash on the table for my wine, and fled from the bar as fast as I could. My hands shook so much I could barely zip my purse shut. I didn't dare look back to see if Peter was behind me. My only thought was getting somewhere well lit and crowded. My heart continued pounding rapidly as I power walked for several blocks, putting as much distance between myself and the bar as possible. I didn't stop moving until I came across a crowded grocery store, where I rushed inside, weaving between aisles filled with shoppers. Only once in the safety of the noisy store did I pause to catch my breath and pull out my phone with trembling hands. I quickly texted my roommate Hannah, giving her a recap of the chilling encounter and saying I was heading home immediately. I begged her to be there when I arrived, not wanting to walk into our empty apartment after what just happened. My mind spun as I waited nervously for the train, scrutinizing every person who passed by, sure that one of them must be Peter coming after me. Thankfully, the ride was uneventful, and I rushed to our apartment as soon as we arrived at my stop. I broke down in tears as soon as I opened the door, collapsing into Hannah's arms. We huddled together on the couch drinking chamomile tea as I recounted every detail of the bizarre and terrifying encounter. We debriefed and talked until nearly sunrise as I began to feel slightly calmer. Some cautious Googling showed no trace of Peter anywhere online, which somehow made things even more unsettling. Who was the stranger who knew so much about me? Eventually, exhaustion overtook adrenaline, and I finally fell into a troubled sleep riddled with nightmares of Peter lurking in the shadows. The next morning, when I woke up, for a split second I thought maybe it had all been some vividly disturbing dream. But then I saw the panicked text to Hannah proving it had been real. I immediately locked down all of my social media accounts, now uneasy about how much personal information this ominous stranger had managed to gather about me and my private world. Had Peter been accessing my online profiles, piecing together details bit by bit? The invasion felt bone-chilling. In the weeks following, I found myself distrustful of new people, constantly wondering whether they somehow knew more about me than they should. My hypervigilance increased exponentially any time I went somewhere alone. For months afterwards, I refused to take the train at night, opting for Ubers despite the extra cost. Hannah had to talk me out of taking self-defense classes multiple times, assuring me that would only feed my paranoia and fear rather than making me feel safer. Gradually over time, the paranoia diminished from a roar to a low hum, but I was permanently warier about meeting people from online dating apps. I now thoroughly vet any matches scouring their social media, and always tell multiple friends the location and time whenever I'm meeting someone new. I purchased pepper spray that I attached to my keychain, clutch it tightly on the walk to and from my car or train. Over a year later, that bizarre and chilling encounter still lingers as a shadow in the recesses of my psyche. I look over my shoulder when walking alone at night, checking shadows, just in case Peter or someone with similarly sinister intentions is somehow still watching me, biding their time. The experience left me feeling unsafe in my own skin, uneasy knowing someone had peeled back my layers without my consent and knew my most intimate secrets. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust in the same open, carefree way again, But slowly, day by day, I'm learning to not let fear dictate my life. What happened shook me, but it did not break me. I'm healing. Swiping left and right on Tinder, I was just looking to meet someone new. After a few weeks of matches that went nowhere, I finally matched with a guy named Frank. His profile seemed normal at first glance. Generic photos of him hiking, out at restaurants, hanging with friends. His bio was short, saying he enjoyed staying active and trying new cuisines around the city. We started chatting and really hit it off right away. Frank came across as very friendly and engaging, asking a lot of questions about me, my job, life in the city. He seemed genuinely interested in learning more. After about a week or so of consistent, easy-flowing conversation, Frank asked if I'd like to meet up for dinner over the upcoming weekend. I was pleasantly surprised and excited by the invitation. He was cute in his pictures, we had a good text rapport, and appeared to have a lot in common. I gladly accepted what I thought would be a fun first date. We picked a casual restaurant downtown for our meetup spot. I arrived first and snagged a table while waiting for Frank to show up. He got there just a few minutes later, apologizing for running late and seeming slightly out of breath. I assured him it was no problem and thanked him for joining me. The conversation picked up right where our pre-date texts had left off, light and easy banter about our interests, funny stories from our weeks, and deeper discussions about our families, values, and future goals. Frank was just as charming in person as he'd come across in our messages. The first part of the evening flew by with nonstop laughter and bonding. About halfway through the meal, though, I noticed Frank staring at me from across the table in an oddly intense way that started to make me feel uncomfortable. When I asked jokingly if I had food in my teeth or something, he brushed it off with an awkward laugh and changed the subject. Toward the end of dinner, Frank brought up my job and workplace. I mentioned in passing the name and feel of the company I work for downtown. At the mention of those details, Frank got strangely quiet for a minute before remarking that the company's name sounded vaguely familiar. I didn't think much of his comment at the time, but looking back later, I realized that was the exact moment his entire demeanor and energy shifted. After we finished up eating, Frank suggested taking a stroll through a park that was just down the street from the restaurant. I agreed a walk sounded nice. The conversation stayed light at first as we made our way into the quiet, tree-lined park, but gradually Frank's questions took on a more serious tone, zeroing in on specifics about my job, coworkers, and daily responsibilities. Though I gave mostly vague answers, not sure why he had become so curious, he continued to press for details. We eventually sat down together on a bench along the walking path. As we talked, Frank moved noticeably closer to me on the seat. Feeling uncomfortable with the decreased physical space between us, I politely shifted my body away from his. In response, Frank turned his head and stared directly into my eyes with an intensity that scared me. His voice took on a bitter, almost angry tone as he said, "So you make a habit of screwing people over, or was my brother just the unlucky one to have you as his supervisor?" My heart instantly dropped to my stomach. Things suddenly started clicking into place. I had a vague memory of Frank's brother working at my company for a short stint a couple years back. We had some issues with his performance and he ended up getting terminated. At the time, it seemed like an amicable enough party on both sides, but clearly Frank had been harboring anger about it ever since. I tried to carefully explain my recollection of the situation with his brother, saying there had been some misunderstanding and I was sorry he felt wronged. But Frank cut me off before I could get far, the volume of his voice rising. "Save your excuses. I know exactly what kind of manipulative person you are. Tim told me all about the crap you put him through, how you targeted and mistreated him until he was forced out. You think you can just ruin people's lives without consequences." I sat stunned, at a complete loss for words. Frank went on loudly venting his frustrations, saying I deserved to suffer for how I had ruined his brother's career, how heartless managers like me needed to learn we can't treat employees so callously without paying the price. I felt my heartbeat quicken, looking around and realizing we were totally alone in this dimly lit park. Hoping to defuse the situation, I gently interrupted Frank's rant to say I should probably get going home. It was getting late after all. I stood up quickly and took a step back as I said this, wanting to be out of his immediate reach. Sensing me trying to leave, Frank suddenly jumped up from the bench and grabbed forcefully onto my wrist, saying we weren't nearly done talking yet. I gasped, startled by the abrupt motion and vice-like grip on my arm. Instinct took over and I attempted desperately to pull myself free from his hold. But Frank only tightened his fingers around my wrist, refusing to let go. Fear shot through every nerve of my body as it dawned on me that I needed to get out of there right away. Adrenaline pumping, I wrenched my arm back with all my strength. Frank lost his grip for just a second, and I turned and ran as fast as I could toward the street we had entered from earlier. I could hear Frank yelling angrily after me, "Where the hell do you think you're going? Get back here." I didn't dare look back. I just kept sprinting block after block until I reached a busier, well-lit section of downtown. I finally slowed to a stop, my lungs burning. Glancing behind me, Frank was nowhere in sight. I quickly weighed down the first cab I saw and gave the driver my address. Locking the car door, I collapsed back into the seat, absolutely drained both physically and emotionally. I sat shaking my head in disbelief at what had just happened. Frank had initially come across as such a normal, decent guy, but as soon as he learned who I was, he turned aggressive and threatening, seeming to have been planning revenge for his brother all along. Arriving home, I immediately deleted Frank's number from my phone and blocked him on every app we had connected on. I kept anxiously peering out the window that night, terrified he might show up outside my apartment. Over the next several days, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder when I was out, afraid I'd run into him lurking around any corner. It took me a very long time to feel safe using Tinder again after that experience. Once I eventually did restart my account, I was much more cautious and worried chatting with new matches, not trusting that people were exactly as they presented themselves to be online. What happened with Frank deeply affected my faith in the online dating world, revealing you ultimately never know a person's true motives or what darkness and resentment they may be hiding when you first connect. My dating life and ability to open up and trust new romantic prospects have never fully recovered since that jarring night of being targeted for someone else's lingering vendetta. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.